Hi friends, so today is a little bit more of a serious topic and it's going to have two parts to what I'm talking about today, and it's more about, I'm going to briefly talk about a first-hand lived experience of mine, and then I'm going to follow it up with my thoughts on what I would have been more mindful of, or what I would have liked to have known sooner to have dealt with that situation. If those of you who might be in the situation of experiencing homelessness in the near future, as the video title probably alludes to, I I obviously got super stuffy about this topic all of a sudden. Alright, so take a deep breath, and I will say that my experience with homelessness was obviously something that wasn't planned. It wasn't something that I necessarily saw for me. I think a lot of people don't really see their experience with homelessness until they're in it. And as I would describe my experience, it sort of progressed slowly and then all at once, if that makes sense. And I still have a hard time really talking about it, just to a degree, in that it makes me feel awkward. I still carry shame regarding that period of my life for reasons that were taught to me at a younger age by the society around us. You know, there's a lot of things in the news about how to address the homeless issue, and it's not always necessarily, hey, let's find these people safe and secure long-term housing. It's more like, how do we get rid of these people? Or at least that's the nuance behind it. And so there's like this shame of falling into a category that a lot of people designate as somebody who is unworthy of being seen. And that was something that was both experienced and not experienced as my time. And I should also define this maybe a little bit more, so it helps to maybe paint the picture a little bit. Everyone experiences homelessness in different ways, and there are people that have shelter by vehicle or shelter by tent, or there's just there are drop-in shelters that are available to some, or it can be really just anything. My experience was more a sleeping on a park bench type of homelessness, and it was something that, like I said, it was like a slow progression, and then it sort of happened all at once. And in the beginning, as it slowly started happening, I had moved a bunch of things into a storage locker in the city where I was living at the time. And when I first realized that I didn't have a place to actually sleep the first night that I didn't have a place to sleep, I went to this 24-hour storage facility, and the stress and anxiety of the situation made me sort of, in a shady way, figure out how to make like the lock was latched on the door when in fact it wasn't actually latched on the door. So I was able to fit myself in the locker space and shut the door, and I used magnets on the other side to keep it closed. And that worked for 3 nights until somebody caught on. And then it became more of an issue of somebody had their eye on me whenever I would show up, because in the beginning I had the ability to not have to carry what I possessed on me, and I would drop in and out and sort of change out with what I needed at the time. And that then progressed to not being able to pay for the locker, and then losing the locker and losing the things in the locker. And I really came down to, I was a person in the city that had my instrument. I had a backpack with a few things that were things, and I had a small little knapsack with my computer, and I also had a dog and a cat that I schlepped around everywhere with me. And I will say that I got into a little bit of a habit eventually where at night, depending on, especially going through the winter, depending on how cold it was, I would sometimes linger in places that were open, and then I would move to this one area where I knew that it was somewhat secure and there weren't a whole lot of people that went by through the night despite the population of the city. And I used to sleep on the park bench with my backpack on my head, and I pinned my instrument on the back of the bench, and I had the laptop on top of me, and I wrapped like all these straps around my right thigh, and I had my cat in the kennel like above both of my thighs, and then my dog slept on top of the computer bag on my chest. And that was how we spent the night, and usually it was not a whole lot of sleep. And then first thing in the morning, I would get up and go to D'Agostino's when they first opened up, when people were distracted, packing things or loading shelves, and prepare for the day in a uncomfortably sketchy way. And then I would walk to the adjacent cafe where they had this thing where you could refill your coffee for 10 cents, which is absolutely crazy. But also, they obviously knew I wasn't refilling my coffee, and they just allowed me to get a coffee. And they had this like little sectioned off area, and I mean, I think anyone that's been in a cafe knows what I'm talking about, where I would go sort of sit in the corner, and I would try to keep to myself, and I would let my dog and my cat, they just sort of sat under the table, and I would get on my computer and I would try to address my current state of affairs, which was not always successful. And I would sometimes just nap right at the table in plain daylight, because it was warm, it felt safe, because there were people around enough that I always felt that somebody would stand up and say something if something were to happen. And that was, and then depending on my pattern, I also would go to the sports, the New York, the city gyms, I forget what they're called, city rec houses, and I would work out and I would take a shower. And there were all kinds of different things, or my patterns would sometimes change in different ways for certain periods of time. Sometimes I got too uncomfortable going to the same D'Agostino's, and so I would start going to a different one. I would go to the rec center, and I would go different times of the day, because I felt insecure about the amount of things I was shoving into a locker or 2 lockers while I was there, because I had to put everything that I was walking around the city with. And I was just doing relatively odd things, and pretending like they weren't odd, because eventually they weren't odd to me, and I was showing up everywhere with things, and I tried to keep myself busy so it looked like I was jumping from one thing to the next. And for a good period of time, I was able to actually make that happen, where I was going from one place in a hospital setting to one community involvement program to another, to like a community orchestra, to something else. And it allowed me to keep busy in the day. It allowed me to be distracted from things, but I also was really good at the Irish exit, in that there was always a point in the day where I knew that I had to get back to where I needed to be, to know that it was going to be secure. And then there was this time where I used to sleep was cut off for filming, and it was cut off for a filming permit for a while, and that forced me to have to revisit where I was sleeping. And that's what led me to, again, do weird things, where I was now at this church that I would volunteer in the daytime with, actually packing food for other people in need, because I felt like I had to give back in a type of way that I didn't know. I felt really lost, and I just needed to do something for other people to help ground me at the time. And so it also allowed me a safe chunk of the day where I can just put my stuff down. And it turns out that they had like their manger display in the back of the church in the narrow alley, and I slept in that off season for a while until the spring came and they were doing renovations. And that was, I think, the only waterproof place that I ever slept in. And to sort of make a long story short on sort of like these bullet points of things, my experience only changed because of an emergency. A hurricane came through the city, and it sort of forced open an opportunity for me to take advantage of a short-term housing situation. And from there, my life began to change in a more stable way. But at that point, after 18 months of just almost hour by hour every day, this chronic stress of not knowing when or if you were going to find something to eat, which I surprisingly usually always did. I don't think I ever went longer than 3 or 4 days without eating. And I was also going back to the shame factor of being in a population that didn't want to be seen. I've also learned that I have a hard time when people are outright ignoring you because they're like looking at your devices, because as somebody who didn't know if I would have access to power, I was also constantly mindful of how charged my devices were and how to designate appropriate time to use those that were productive and beneficial. And so there were times where I would constantly be sitting there witnessing or being somebody who was walked by, or again, seeing other people being walked by and just outright dismissed in place of the devices in front of other people. And so I still have a hard time with that. And I think that some of my materialistic qualities of, I like nice things, but it's not that I want things and clutter and hoarding. I like nice things that stay nice things. I like to take care of something, and when something sort of gets tarnished or depreciates in value, I feel like the expeditious nature of it breaking down to not being a functional life aid is sort of imminent. It becomes visually clear, and the stress on how to replace that in life also becomes clear, because during my period of homelessness, I did not have there was a point where my computer just didn't work for, I think, like 2 weeks. It just didn't work, and then suddenly it started working again. And as somebody who didn't have access to be able to fix it, it really left me unplugged. And then I will say another thing is, I think this goes back to people looking past other people in place of devices, is the aspect of I was constantly sort of hiding. So I was in plain sight of people who I didn't know, like complete strangers walking by. But my situation in these like weird things on, well, why are you showing up with all of these like, you're a bag lady. Like, why are you constantly showing up? Or why are you always walking places? Why don't you just take a cab? I was constantly making excuses and sort of flubbing or omitting details that made things seem like they didn't quite make sense, but they did make sense to a degree, and it made me seem like weird and quirky. And even after obtaining housing and things began to change, and I have not actually told this period of my life for what it was to another person until last year. And it was something that I waited a long time to share, even with Caleb, as being essential. My first point of contact, I like sorta talked about what this part of my history was with a therapist, and then the second part, or the second person, was then Caleb, and it was many years after we have been dating and married, and it felt sort of crucial in understanding sort of my current construct in sort of chasing down personal growth and addressing some mental health things. And it was a very vulnerable position to be in, to open up and share this particular chapter of my life, even after developing the safety and the history with, your significant other. And even beyond him, I've never directly told other people that I know or have known on an intimate level, like close friends from my past and that kind of thing. Because even at the time that this was a current aspect of my life, there would be like these little moments here and there where I would open the door a little bit to ask for help or explain the situation I was in. And it was always met with, no, you can't leave this bag here and pick it up in 2 days or tomorrow, or other situations that are oddly specific to really talk about that might not make sense. But those little doors would open up in the past, and then they would just be closed immediately. And that's what made me sort of learn that to maintain any sense of normalcy, I had to hide this from the people who knew me and that I socialized with, but also I just had to let it be for what it was and let it be seen by people who didn't know me. And then to unpack this now, almost 10 years later, has been an unexpected process for me. And that's a long way around talking about something, and I do want to maybe talk about the things that I wish that I had known and I had been prepared for in the event that maybe that this is beneficial for someone else to pick up on or hear and maybe apply or prepare for if they feel like that's coming. So I want to maybe highlight some things that, like I said, I wish I would have known. I am rambling a little bit because I keep having these weird... I do notice that I'm rambling a little bit, and I think it's because I keep having these reoccurring moments of discomfort as I sort of touch on these things. So even though I'm being relatively general, maybe a couple specific things, I can almost relive and refeel some of these moments and periods of time around them very much in the present. It is a stressful state of being that I think unless you're actually in it with this factor of you don't know when you're going to be out of it, these memories sort of burn into you in a way that I think just sort of carry with you. All right, anyway, one of the things, as I sort of identified, I was a little bit of a bag lady. I would say that if the potential of not knowing where you are going to sleep at night and not having the resources or the connections on at least creating a temporary transition to that, and you do have some sort of remainder of funds, spend it on what you know you're going to need to survive first, and let all of the other stuff fall apart around you. And with that, I mean, get a bag that is sturdy and reliable. And I say that because, as I mentioned, one of my bags was like a regular backpack, and eventually the top shoulder strap detached from the backpack component, and I didn't have the resources to replace the bag, but also I didn't have anything to repair it either. I think I jerry-rigged it to a degree for a period of time that got me annoyingly by until I purged a couple of other things and overloaded my computer bag with some of these things. And because I had a very sturdy shoulder bag that was built and constructed very well, and I think I still have it, to be honest. And the idea behind this is you are constantly carrying your basic needs with you, and you will be able to find what you do and do not need. So things like toilet paper you will find in public restrooms, but there will be other things that you do find that you do want or need to carry with you in this transition period, and that you need some sort of universal way so you're not constantly walking around with things like this, or in plastic bags that rip and decompose and tear. And you also want something that you can safely secure at night, that is something that you can wrap around yourself so it doesn't get carried off by somebody else, which is a real thing that is and does and can happen. That's something that I've both seen and experienced. So the importance behind investing in a well-constructed bag is great, and it's not something, you don't need a giant bag, because at least in my experience, you will find that your life and your possessions get relatively very essential and very small, and it's very much you will learn to live without a lot of things that you think are essential now, that will no longer be essential in that state of being. And the more sort of space you have for the opportunities you can have for little treats that you will find, and I will sort of talk about this in a later category, but things like deodorant is something that I found to be a relative treat that I didn't always have the access to, but when I did, sometimes I was glad that I had a backpack to include that particular item in. And yeah, so you just want something that allows you to pack the essentials of what you will find that you will need, and what you do and do not need will change over time. But the backpack in something that you can feasibly carry with you long term. With that being said, that this feeds into, well, I don't know where to go with this. I think this needing a bag is important, but it feeds into realizing storage on where you can and cannot actually put your things. And as I mentioned, there were these weird opportunities in my past where I would ask about leaving my things here and there every once in a while, and space is something that everyone struggles with being able to clear up and have available. So knowing where is safe for you is something that is going to either be something that you socially network or something you creatively come up with on your own. And talking about some of the shady things or the uncomfortable things that I utilized while I was in this period of my life was I would know when trash pickup was in certain areas, and I used to sometimes store some of my things in trash cans in the areas after trash collection. So I knew that the bins would be empty and I could put my items in. And I also knew that not a lot of people were going specifically into trash cans. And it was always something that when I knew I needed to hide my stuff for a period of time, I also had to plan ahead. So I knew how to hide it in that space when there weren't going to be people witnessing what I was doing. Or I would have to sort of present myself as I was the person who owned the trash cans, and I was doing something that was completely normal, even though it was a little bit something that was unusual to what I had found normal at the time of hiding my things in trash cans. But you will find that you may have to be creative in storage. And with that being said, like with the bag and the components of what you can feasibly carry with you and what you find essential and not, your storage, what you need for storage is something that I wouldn't shed light to on food. Like, you don't think about carrying food with you. Food is something that presents itself, and that's also something that carries with me. Like, I know that when I am like out in public, I have this weird reaction sometimes where if there's like food at some sort of an event space, I find myself feeling like I need to discreetly consume what I can, because that was a situation I was in for such a period of time where this was an opportunity to that I was sort of welcome to consume the food that was presented rather than not have it presented. And I still find myself checking that reaction of getting something that is temporary because I can't necessarily take it with me. Or there were certain times where I would pack things in a certain way and discreetly hide it, which again was something that was stressful, right? You're doing something in like this hidden, stealthy kind of way. And see, yeah, I can already tell in the change in the way I'm talking about it. There's like that little bit of shame that I still carry with this. And I shouldn't. But the reality of when you think about storage and your bag and what you're carrying, I would say that you want certain things to get you by, like little like trail mix type of treats or whatever that is, candy bar or whatever, piece of fruit. You want those kind of things, but when like you're not thinking like camping where you're taking canned goods. You will be exhausted if you're schlepping around that kind of weight. So the idea of storage is, even if you have to hide something or store it in a way that is out of sight, you may have to think about the creative aspects of, one, who can you trust and who might have the ability to leave something that you can frequently access, even if they're not around, as well as if you don't have somebody that you can access for space and storage, where might an opportunity present itself that you can safely stash your items? And maybe having that planned out ahead of time is something that would have cut down a lot of stress on me. I did know that once I was able to sort of designate a certain area, I would use it for sort of a period of time before I would change it up and use something different somewhere else. Because I learned that you never wanted to become too comfortable and second guess something. If you're constantly moving onward or doing something new, I had more of a success rate in my experience with maintaining things. I did have experiences where I would lose something or something would be taken when I wasn't paying attention. And I think that's just sort of the nature of that type of existence, as unfortunate as that is. Hygiene. So, one at the end, I know for me, I had stressed all afternoon and evening, not thinking I knew where I was going to sleep that night. And then even when I got to the night, and public places were very limited in what was open at 3 a.m. The stress of not knowing where to sleep seemed most present, and eventually that got itself sorted out in the weird way to me that it did. But then what sort of pops up is you're distracted from this idea of you are not necessarily bathing and you're not engaging in brushing your teeth, or you are not able to wash your clothes. Have sort of like a hygiene plan, and I would say that I highly recommend, and I don't know what this looks like now in the current health crisis, but the city rec departments really helped me a lot in this aspect of, I paid for an entire year with what little funds I had available to me relatively early on in this situation. And I am glad that, as it was a significant payment at the time for someone who quickly had nothing. I think it was something like $60 for an entire year, which for some sort of access to their facilities. And I used to take these long hot showers and soap, and like I said, I didn't always have deodorant, so I was thoroughly washing myself with the soap that was available, and the ability to at least have a moment where I can sort of safely secure my things and work out. And sometimes not work out, sometimes just quietly cry in the shower. It's like these are very real moments, but like the idea of being able to know where you're going to shower, and if you are planning ahead, those essential items of knowing where you're going to brush your teeth and knowing where you're going to do laundry, or if you can do laundry. Look at your nearest rec center or your Planet Fitness or whatever that looks like, because the power of a shower is something that is, I think, just crucial in this type of atmosphere. I know that I find myself sometimes, even to this day, taking very, very long showers, and it's a way to de-stress and reframe what's going on and feel like you're at least in this one secure place for this moment of time. Like, you know, you're going to occupy this space. So having a plan for hygiene, and again, if you have sort of like a dwindling or a small amount of money, outside of investing in a bag, invest in a place that will secure some sort of a hygiene plan. I think that is so essential. Now, sleep. I think I've talked about this a couple of times. Sleep sort of goes in line with weather. I didn't always have a good plan. I think I went almost the entire winter season, no winter coat and no rain jacket. And every time there would be like wet precipitation, I constantly found myself suffering in the moment and trying to think, okay, I will fix this before the next time. And then I would just sort of play my odds with the weather on, well, it's not raining now. This isn't a critical emergency at the time. Plus, if I have this added thing, I'm going to be carrying it around with me. And like I said, what changes as what is and is not essential will just be sort of variable depending on the time and the situation. And so I did not have a good plan with weather. And there was even one night where I was, this one building I knew was in a secure place. It was adjacent to the bench I used to sleep on. And there was one night, it was like pouring down rain, like just pouring down rain. And they had this tiny little awning, and it was a business that it closed down and their lights were out. So it was one of those places where I didn't think I was actually being seen. And it wasn't even big enough to lay down. So I had like leaned back, and as you know, I had my things that I had wrapped around my shoulders instead of my thighs. And I had my dog and my cat and I was like leaning back on and trying to sleep this way when, you know, a police officer got out of his car in the pouring down rain and walked through this like dark park and told me that I couldn't sleep or I couldn't hang out under this awning and I had to move along. And I spent a very awkward night, soaking wet in like the Chinatown McDonald's until morning, where I could then move back to where I knew I could get a hot cup of coffee and be able to sort of take a nap in a cafe. And I think that was probably my worst actual night, even though it doesn't sound terribly bad. But weather is something that I never had a plan for. When I was sleeping in like the Christmas manger behind a church, that allowed for a good sort of secure place against the weather and the wind. The wind is a big deal, obviously, in the winter times more than the summer. Nordic winds are they will take the breath out of you, and it was Yeah, I wish I had like firm advice on how to plan for weather from personal experience, but really my message here is know that weather will happen. It will sometimes be something that you know is coming and sometimes you don't see coming. It will be sudden. Sort of think ahead to how you will deal with weather at different times of day, different seasons, those spontaneous downpours where you might be sleeping or it might be the middle of the day. It may or may not affect you in real time. I would say just have a plan and be mindful of that. And then my one last thing is I was sporadic with actually keeping with therapy during this time. If you can imagine, I was like hiding all of this and then also trying to address existing problems at the same time while I was in therapy about other stuff. And it was like, it felt like it was too much to unpack and actually present itself in that environment. And even then, I had these issues where I didn't know how or where to get there safely or on time, and I would miss a lot of appointments until I was a problem client who was terminated from services for not showing up. I will say that if you have the strength to be upfront with some sort of drop-in counselor or some sort of like Catholic Charities is not affiliated to the Catholic Church. Outside of partial funding, they are just regular therapists. There are different organizations that have sort of a social services type of therapy model that's available. Colleges and universities tend to have some sort of open counseling to the general public at a reduced or no cost. And if you have the strength better than I did at the time, or the ability to be vulnerable to a relative stranger about a very significant presence in your life, about your state of residence or your experienced homelessness, share that with them. And because I think I look back on something that I wish I would have known when, and I was constantly distracted by all of these other things outside of therapy that, one, devalued what I was actually getting from it, because I couldn't actually focus on this because everything else was falling apart. And so this obviously eventually fell apart too. And now, many years later, after ingraining a lot of survival techniques in my life that makes me, that I'm still unpacking to a degree. Like I said, I went almost 9 years with my now husband 8 years, until I was able to share this with him in a very small type of way that then facilitated the need for several follow-up conversations and the ability to revisit some past situations and to shed some light on, one, healing and understanding and empathy, and also the ability to constructively grow efficiently and sustainably together in a more honest type of way. That the work that's being done now may not be so intense if I was able to at least slowly unpack it in the past. And I think the reality of this situation is, even with like some sort of social worker, most people are not going to have this particular piece of advice on being able to engage with. But if there is something that, again, you have a small reserve of money now and the potential for a period of time without having a place to go is on the horizon, and you can pay ahead or have some sort of an agreement having somebody to confide in and unpack some unexpected mental health or social stigmas related to what you're about to experience, and have somebody just sort of there as a constant variable while you figure out how to open this up to other people would be a beneficial thing to have. And yeah, so I think just to, if I could like look down real quick, just like to recap my piece of advice on how to maybe, if you find yourself slowly progressing there to this type of potential, have a secure bag, know where you're potentially going to store this bag or other items that you can't take with you everywhere that you go. Have a hygiene plan. Think about where you are going to be sleeping, whether that may present, and if you are able to have somebody that understands the actual stress and the chronic, the endurance that you will need to navigate all of the stress that comes from what you're doing to survive this period of time. If you can identify a trained professional to be a constant variable in your life for that, try and secure and keep that in place. And there's probably going to be a bunch of jump cuts in here because I did get a little emotional here and there and a little choked up, because this is something that is going to have an influential impact on you. And even if you're able to internalize and compartmentalize this period of your life for this moment of time, it will be something that has to be revisited at some point, or you will be surprised to see how some of those survival skills do pop up later on that seem like wildly out of place, or like they came out of nowhere, or they were a disproportionate reaction to something. And it may take some time to work through that. And I know that for me, I felt like I had to. What's unfortunate is that things can't be concurrent to each other. You can't address mental health without also having a place to stay, know where your food is going to be, and the ability to properly access hygiene in a way that makes you feel okay. And these things will disproportionately come in different waves that do and do not sync up. And that's the unfortunate nature of that situation. And like I said, it took a hurricane to temporarily change my problem enough that it gave me a moment of time where I could breathe enough that I could take a step forward. But for 18 months, I could not find that anywhere else. I had to sort of wait for something else to move the moment for me. And for a situation that I was not in control of, I needed another situation that I wasn't in control of to shift it. And I had to ride between those two. And everyone's experience with homelessness will look different of what they will have accessible to them. But for someone that may experience it in the way that I have, by sleeping out under the night sky in every season on a park bench in a Christmas manger at a church in the middle of a city park at times, and in bushes, I wish I would have known these particular things, and some of them I was able to access going into it a little bit, and then some things I was never able to fully get control of at all. But I wish I had the ability to, or the foresight to. And with that being said, I think that I am going to end it here. I hope that nobody is coming into this type of situation. And I will link some resources down below. And I'm working on revamping my website, and I think I'm going to make a very lengthy blog entry as to what might also be beneficial. And once I complete that, I will also link that under this video. And yeah, so that is it for this little share. But yeah, Thanksgiving is on the horizon, and every year, just like as a real small sentimental note, I've spent a lot of years alone on the holidays, and it never really bothered me, because I used to always sit, especially for Thanksgiving, with the anticipation of having a place that I could welcome other people in to my space in a loving place, like all is welcome. And it was a very long time to wait for that feeling. And I know that it doesn't have to exist on Thanksgiving. It can happen all the time. And, you know, you're talking about societal norms earlier in my video about how we treat the homeless population in general, of not wanting to see them. And so there's this cultural norm of we do all of our gratitude and thankfulness on this one particular day in mass together. And so that's why there's this extra there's this extra history of upbringing around this particular day, where I reflect on it, because especially on the days in my past when there was nobody around me, I would think about how I would love to have people around me once I was in a place that could open my doors. And for the last several years, I've been blessed to have that with my husband. And instead of doing some sort of Thanksgiving specific type of video this year, I wanted to maybe reflect on something that is uncomfortable and something that we don't necessarily think about, and something that is important. And I know I'm also aware that because people hide their state of homelessness, I know that even for me, for a year and a half, people would look at me or not really, that was never a thought that came on that would come to somebody quickly. But for this particular Thanksgiving, I am thinking about that. There are people that are in real need this year, and we don't have the social safety nets to help everybody in the ways that they particularly need. They will be helped in the way that a system is constructed and defined to be able to help them. And that is not something that can get people to step forward on their own as freely. And so think about what local causes or organizations help fill the gaps of those bigger organizations, and maybe look into donating there. And I will do some research and link some of those down below as well. And yeah, I'm going in a roundabout way, but I know with Thanksgiving, I know how blessed I am now with having a warm, loving home with a husband. And it took a lot of years to get to this point. And even with being here now, there's still ongoing work from what had been. And I am not the only one that has had this experience, and I am not the only person who will have this experience. So share this or comment down below anything that you think is important that I may have forgotten about. And yeah, I hope less people experience this. And I don't know the right way to really wrap this up. other than to just say I will share more with you soon, and that's it. Choose.